Greetings, everyone. So glad you're here. My name is Karen Anderson, and our website is called luminousself.com. Today I'm going to be reading a chapter from our third book, which is called We Are the Awakening Christ. And this is about an experience that I had very early in our connection, when Barry and I were still really getting to know each other and really didn't know a lot about each other's spiritual background. And so, as you'll see in the beginning of the reading, we weren't on the same page. It's like a friend of ours said to us early in our connection, too. He said, "You two are coming from opposite ends of the universe." And we felt that to be true in so many different ways. It seems to be one of the core characteristics of a twin flame relationship, that you're not identical. You're not at all. I mean, a lot of the romanticized ideas about being twin flames are that, you agree on everything and you see everything in life from the same perspective and everything is just harmonious and one. And what we found is that there's a lot of bridging that needs to happen to experience that oneness sometimes, because the personalities have had lots of different experiences, as you'll hear in this reading. So let's begin. When Barry and I were brought together in 1989, the Christ had already become a central presence in his life. I had trouble relating to that. My early experiences in church did not foster a great love of Jesus. The Sunday school teachers appeared to be particularly deficient in the qualities they ascribed to the Christ, and the whole experience each Sunday seemed hypocritical and shallow. By age 12, I had had enough. I told my parents I wouldn't be going to church anymore. Fortunately, they were fine with that decision, to the point of joining me in it. Actually, what they said to me at the time was, "Oh, well, that's okay. We were only going for you kids." Neither of my parents was particularly religious, and they felt that they needed to provide us with some kind of religious education, but if we weren't interested, they really weren't either. So that all worked out. In my young adulthood, my spiritual quest took me on a virtual journey around the world as I opened to the gifts of traditions ranging from the clear emptiness of the Zen Buddhists to the heart-melting love of the Sufis. As I read a multitude of metaphysical books, interspersed with workshops and conversations with friends, I gradually distilled the essence that was meaningful to me from all the different paths and practices I explored. This enriched my life in ways I had never found in Christianity. If I had had a church experience that spoke to the heart and soul, things might have gone differently. But the watered-down religious atmosphere of my youth seemed dull and dry in comparison to the rich living essence that saturated so many other spiritual traditions. So when I met Barry, I was somewhat put off by his involvement with the Christ. As a woman and a feminist, I knew more than I wanted to know about the horrors perpetrated by the Christian Church in the name of the Christ. As part of my metaphysical exploration, I had relived lifetimes during which I was burned at the stake and drowned for being a, quote, heretic or a, quote, witch, someone whose intuitive wisdom and free-thinking ways threatened the power of the church. I had met many other women with similar soul memories of the suffering and trauma that resulted from the Christian Church's absolutist dogma. So all of this arose when Barry talked about the Christ, making it nearly impossible for me to fully open to receive what he was saying. Not wanting to invalidate the spiritual blessings he had found, I accepted the fact that we seemed to have different paths and let it go at that. But within a short time, two pivotal experiences changed my relationship to the Christ. And I was the last person who thought they would ever have these kinds of experiences because of my background. But through these experiences, I began to realize that there was something going on that had nothing to do with what the church had perpetrated centuries ago or with the abuses still taking place in Christ's name. To my utter surprise, these direct experiences revealed that the Christ is a living reality, a phenomenon of energy and consciousness more palpable and immediate than anything else I had ever experienced. The first of these experiences unfolded as I began to bring awareness into my heart-soul center, or what we would now think of as the soul lotus. We had begun to suggest to clients that they make this a foundation of their spiritual practice. For as awareness comes to rest in the heart, in that soul center, our actions are more likely to arise from our sacred core, instead of the ego personality or the mind, and our outer lives reorient to reflect our inner divinity. Unlike Barry, I had not noticed my awareness spontaneously traveling into this space, as he has shared earlier in the third book, or in our first book too. Since connecting with the Heart-Soul Center was a new experience for me, just as it was for clients, I began to work with this practice every day in my meditation time. So each morning during meditation, I invited awareness to travel on the breath toward the Heart-Soul Center. As I breathed into and felt the sensations that were present, I'd ask my soul to come into my conscious awareness. But day after day, I saw and sensed nothing but a big dark cave in the center of my chest. This brought up the self-doubt that was always lurking just beneath the surface. Why was it that others had all kinds of amazing spiritual experiences, while my inner world only reminded me of a poem I had taped to the wall of my college dorm room? It had only 2 lines, but they said it all. My soul is gray. Please pass the paisley crayon. As much as I wished something different were happening, I knew of no way to bring that about. So I would travel into the enormous dark cave and settle in on the hard stone floor, waiting for something to happen. Day after day, nothing did. My mind insisted I was a total spiritual failure. What was I doing facilitating soul awakening sessions when I seemed utterly incapable of experiencing anything when I went within? How long would it take clients to figure out I was an imposter? And what about Barry? Would he discover he had made a mistake and that I was not the spiritual complement he thought I was? Ever since I had begun to search for more meaning in life, I had met people with spiritual abilities I could only dream of accessing. They saw or felt presences when they meditated, had profound dreams, and received beautiful messages from their guides. They seemed so spiritually gifted, while I felt as though I belonged in a remedial class. Old familiar feelings of shame and hopelessness threatened to overtake me. And then, one day, when my awareness traveled into the cave, a tiny flame glowed in the middle of the vast, dark expanse. Faint shadows flickered on the curved walls of the cavern. I could barely see the little fire, but it was there. Everything had changed. Now, whenever I ventured into the cave, the small but steadily burning flame magnetically drew me to it. I'd sit near it on the ground, comforted by its presence. As I spent more time communing with the little light, it grew. Each day when I'd enter the cave, it appeared bigger and brighter. I continued to go into the cavern each morning, and the flame kept growing. The growth of the flame seemed to be a metaphor for my budding soul awareness, not just during meditation time, but in daily life. This seemed encouraging, although my mind continued to insist I was a hopeless spiritual laggard. The light now resembled a small campfire, blazing with a reassuring feeling of constancy that began to pervade my outer life. The emotional turmoil that had darkly shaded my existence slowly transformed into ever-increasing calmness. Trusting my soul to lead the way, I felt more and more confident during sessions. No longer fearing that my facilitation might not be effective, or worse, that what I said or did would derail the session or somehow damage people, I went with whatever it came to me to do or say, trusting that it came from the soul. One morning, as I brought my awareness into my inner world yet again, I discovered the flame no longer burned within the cave. It now blazed atop a sturdy staff suspended outside the entrance to the cavern. Now I could pick up the torch and carry it wherever the light of the soul was needed. As I stood at the entrance to the cave, absorbing this big new change in my inner landscape, I turned to look around. For the first time, I realized that outside the cave grew a garden, a place of exquisite beauty and peace, lush with greenery and flowers. I looked back at the arched entrance to the cave and inwardly heard the words, "The Cave of the Resurrection." The words sprang into my consciousness, ringing with portent. I then found myself drawn to wander about the garden. As I drank in its stillness and grace, I unexpectedly heard a second message. This is the garden of the resurrection. I continued to bask in the refined vibration of this extraordinary place, absorbing the import of these altogether intriguing communications, when another phrase suddenly blossomed within my consciousness. You are the garden of the resurrection. I was stunned. I felt deeply moved, hardly daring to believe what I was receiving from beyond. Yet here I was, and the message had come to me. For years, I had wanted nothing more than to serve as an agent of transformation. Because my own emotional storms had often been seriously intense and even life-threatening, I yearned to offer others evolutionary support so their path would not need to be as difficult as mine had been. In sessions, I had often vicariously glimpsed what lay on the other side of suffering when it could be fully met and felt. The direct experience of our own true magnificence. During my long years of turmoil, I had often wondered if I would ever become empty enough of all my pain so something beyond it could come through me, something that would help others. No matter how far I came, I still seemed to have such a long way to go. Suddenly, in one moment, a lifetime of self-doubt was obliterated by the realization that I already was everything I had sought outside myself. There was nothing I needed to do or learn or become. In that moment of crystal clarity, I knew beyond all doubt that I am the space in energy and consciousness that facilitates resurrection in those who are ready for that to happen. As I reflected on the entire experience, I realized that it could mean only one thing: that the cave in my inner world was actually the tomb of Jesus, in which he had experienced the resurrection. When I heard the words, "You are the garden of the resurrection," I was given a new level of purpose for this entire incarnation. The words indicated that my role in sessions was to simply hold a space of resurrection for all who came, all who were burdened by their traumas, memories, pain, and suffering. My only job was to be that garden. The rest would simply happen on its own, in that energetic space that embodied what the Christ had demonstrated through the resurrection of his physical form. It seemed highly significant to me that I was not told I was the cave of the resurrection, but the garden. In the cave or tomb, Jesus went through the transmutation that would leave an imprint like no other on his burial shroud and would eventuate in the ascension. He would go on from this world into a higher realm, returning to his ultimate home. But the people I was to connect with were to live out the transformations they experienced in sessions here within the third dimensional world, for a while longer at least. The resurrections that I, as the garden, would catalyze were intended to bring people deeper into the livingness of the physical realm, with its flowers and sunsets and rivers flowing over mossy rocks. The garden is a friendly, inviting space, unlike the austerity of the cave in which Jesus transformed into a Christ. A garden's organic cycles of rising up and falling away remind us that resurrection is a natural process, one to be embraced and welcomed instead of feared and avoided. Yet I had spent the bulk of this lifetime within the dark cave of forgetting my true divine nature. I had incarnated into a family in which people killed themselves when they no longer remembered who they were or why they were here. Some committed outright suicide, while others drank to distraction or lived dangerously. My own struggles to remain alive and engaged in the face of crippling self-condemnation had severely taxed previous relationships and prevented me from confidently actualizing my abilities. It seemed that, while I was to serve as the garden of the resurrection, I was also to bring my intimate knowledge of the cave to whatever unfolded in my presence. I was no stranger to intense emotions. Feelings of utter helplessness and hopelessness had often overtaken me during times of deep despair. Throughout my life, I had died and died again to the tormenting beliefs that were making my existence a living hell. I knew about darkness and death and had experienced enough resurrection to keep me here, just barely, as it often felt. All of this, as it appeared, was also to inform whatever came through me as my service. As deeply grateful as I was for the revelation that I am the garden of the resurrection, and as amazed as I felt to be shown this aspect of my true nature, it was still hard for me to believe that I had been given this kind of experience. As I have shared above, my spiritual journey had not centered on the Christ in any way. Yet here I was, having a living experience of the essence of what the Christ had brought to the planet. And it was to continue to be expressed through me, of all people. This was almost as surprising as the experience itself. After this life-altering inner activation, a series of women came to me for soul awakening sessions. Each of them was burdened with the pain of a lifetime, if not many lifetimes, arising out of childhood sexual abuse. At the time I wondered, why are they coming to me? My life contains no history of abuse. Yet one after the other these women arrived, and despite the self-doubt that still lingered within me, they all wanted to work alone with me. It was as though a subliminal message had gone out into the planetary minefield. Come this way if you're ready to resurrect what has seemed past redeeming until now. These sessions were as profound for me as they were for the women who came. At last I felt the tremendous sense of satisfaction I'd always dreamed of, the feeling of being totally utilized to guide others into and through their pain to the place beyond the suffering. As they died to who and what they thought they were, and to all they had believed was true about themselves, they were reborn into a softer, gentler way of being with all that had happened in their lives. Within the garden of the resurrection, they found new life, where all had seemed arid and lifeless and beyond hope. From amidst the rubble of the past, the luminosity of the true self shone forth. This was what I had always wanted, for my very presence to catalyze major change. I had been co-facilitating sessions with Barry for a while now, and had been gradually feeling more comfortable and confident about the quality of my presence and facilitation. But now, without my doing a thing, it had gone to an entirely new level. I found myself doing and saying much less, and feeling far more effective. Sessions unfolded easily and effortlessly as I simply held the sacred space for them to go wherever they needed to go. The mind was quiet. No longer did it endlessly generate ideas about what I should be doing or saying. All striving, all worry, all efforting had ended. What remained was the absolute knowing that my presence was enough. A deeper part of me, a part that was connected to immeasurably vaster levels of awareness, was now doing the sessions. The surface level was quiet and had all but disappeared from consciousness. The calm, clear presence deep within myself was something I had always yearned to bring to sessions, but the mind had been so busy worrying about my effectiveness, my appropriateness, my all-rightness, that the deeper level of stillness had been obscured by all that mental activity. Now in sessions, people went so deep into their pain that I was astounded and awed by their courage and their willingness to submit to the process wherever it took them. At times it was a challenge for me to stay present to all that was erupting from the depths. Yet if I remembered to simply let the surface levels of myself do whatever they were doing without giving any of it energy, and if I invited the deeper and vaster levels to take over, the miracle of resurrection inevitably happened. After they dove into the depths of their pain, many of the women found themselves entering into a sacred space of acceptance and even forgiveness for all that had taken place. The wounds they had sustained now found their place within the evolutionary story of their lives. The women no longer needed to hold on to or be consumed by resentment, rage, or the feelings of helpless victimization that had colored their lives for decades. Through dying to what had previously ruled their lives, they were being reborn into a place of freshness and new beginnings. Although the words were never uttered, the Christ consciousness had entered into these sessions. This is the level of being that enables radical, unconditional forgiveness to spontaneously come forth. From this elevation, we see ourselves and all others as souls who have temporarily forgotten their true estate. From here, it is clear that perpetrators of violence are acting out of their own pain, their own suffering and trauma. In this series of sessions, many of the women realized that those who had harmed them had also been grievously damaged and could only perpetuate that pain. All ascribing of blame had fallen away in the realization that each person involved had been wounded and could only repeat the same until it was healed. The resurrecting power of the Christ had brought about the deepest of healings in these women, leaving no doubt that from now on their lives would be very different. Presumably, they would no longer need to perpetuate the cycle of pain that had caused so much suffering in their own lives. Each of these women had already experienced some form of death, a necessary precursor to the ultimate blessing grace of resurrection. For some, it was the death of their innocence during their original trauma. For others, it was the death of hope, of possibility, of the dream of living life in a free and unimpeded way. In the hearts of many of them, the dream of equal, loving relationships between men and women had died long ago. More than a few arrived for their session after years of therapy, hoping that at last the deepest roots of their suffering could finally be reached and transcended. They had carried around their pain for far too long. It was time to lay their burdens down. Now, these courageous women had to die to all of this. They had to completely let go of everything that had happened in their lives, all that had scarred their hearts and obscured their souls. Through that death, a death that we faced together, resurrection was able to take place. Without the willingness to die to all that they had known and all that they had suffered, one of the greatest blessings it is possible to receive, that of the resurrection, could not have occurred. That's the end of the reading from our third book, but I would like to add a brief postscript to that passage, because it so beautifully illustrates what we've come to know as deeply as we know anything in this lifetime. That the figure 8 of soul evolution is impeccable. The wisdom that leads it to take us down and in and then up and out is something that no human mind could possibly come up with. And I would just like to encourage each one of you to realize that it is really through diving into the deepest levels of our pain and suffering that the most profound awakenings and illuminations occur. If we go halfway, what we get is often halfway. But if we are willing to dive all the way to the bottom, or all the way to wherever the divine wants us to go and knows we're ready to go, the blessings that come are unbelievable. They're beyond anything we could imagine with our human minds. And so it may seem really scary to go there, to go that deep, to face whatever it is that is there, that's been waiting there for years or decades or even lifetimes. But to the degree that we are willing to surrender into divine wisdom, and we are willing to receive divine courage, The journey is always revealed to be completely worthwhile. It's always taking us to a new place of realization of who we are, of how life really is, and of what is possible as we evolve in our soul evolution. So I wish you well along your way. And if this recording has inspired you to connect with us, I look forward to meeting with you on Zoom or possibly in person if you're in the neighborhood. Love and blessings to you. Namaste.